The avoidance unhealthy behaviors are not your fault. Their emotional unavailability is not your fault. You were not there in this person's childhood. You did not cause their childhood attachment wounds. When they distanced on you, when they pulled away, when they stopped replying to your messages, or when they withdrew from affection, when they abruptly discarded you, when they slow faded out into oblivion, when they called you needy for asking for the bare minimum, none of that is your fault. You can't make anybody behave in a certain way. You can't force anybody to take any kind of action. Even if you made mistakes in the relationship, you are still not responsible for their lack of communication, their emotional unavailability, or their attachment wounds. And you're certainly not responsible for their behavior. If you showed up as a loving partner, as a consistent partner, you were there for them, you prioritized them, you showed concern for their wants and needs. If you were emotionally available for them and they still did this, you are not to blame. Actually, if anything, your consistency and your emotional availability is exactly why they behave this way. Understand, avoidance, especially dismissive avoidance and fearful avoidance that lean dismissive, they are specifically triggered by healthy relationship behaviors. Now, these behaviors trigger a very specific set of fears. The fear of abandonment, the fear of rejection, and the fear of engulfment. The fear of engulfment is the fear of losing their independence in a relationship to somebody who's ultimately going to abandon and reject them. These fears go back to this person's childhood when they were emotionally neglected by a parent or caretaker. They weren't shown the love and the nurturing in the way that a child needs. They weren't able to discuss emotions. They were not able to express their feelings freely. Their feelings were routinely dismissed, if not outright rejected. This creates a person that doesn't know how to process emotions, doesn't know how to deal with life stress or relationship stress, and a person that has learned to associate emotional closeness with disappointment, rejection, and abandonment, because the people that they relied on for their emotional needs as children ultimately let them down. So when they have a consistent, loving, healthy partner, this triggers their fears because they've learned when emotional intimacy builds, they get hurt. So they create walls around their heart. And when somebody starts to poke through and they start to have feelings, it frightens them. They deactivate. They take their feelings for their partner. They suppress them. They bury them. They stop allowing themselves access to those feelings. And they create emotional distance between themselves and their partner as a way to self-soothe and to feel safe. That distance feels safe, intimacy feels unsafe. So if you're a consistent, loving partner, emotional intimacy is naturally building, which will trigger the fears of the avoidant. When you are personalizing this unhealthy behavior, when you are trying to take responsibility for somebody else's unhealthy behavior, you are trying to control the uncontrollable. This will push you into anxiousness, into anxious attachment, which is fueled by self-doubt because you are doubting yourself. You are doubting your perception of reality. And you are blaming yourself. Well, I must have done something wrong. It must have been me. I wasn't good enough. Instead, focus on actual reality. You cannot make anybody show up in any kind of way in a relationship. Everybody has free will and makes their own choices for behaviors. You can't force anybody to do anything. When somebody engages in an unhealthy behavior, nobody ever makes them do that. It's always a choice on this person's part, and it's a choice that often comes from a place of deep insecurities. A person with a low self-esteem. You are not responsible for that. Remind yourself of that. Stay grounded. Understand why this person behaves the way they do. Understanding doesn't mean you have to tolerate it, like it, or accept it. But when you are focusing on understanding rather than self-blame, you are shortening the duration of your pain, of your heartache. And you are heading down the path of healing because you're not blaming yourself, and instead you're understanding that this person's attachment wounds are inevitably going to get triggered when you show up as a good partner. It hurts, it's sad, and it's gonna hurt regardless, but you have a fork in the road. You can go down the path of more pain, or you can go down the path of reducing your pain. And self-blame leads to things like rumination, constantly second-guessing yourself, going down memory lane, replaying every incident with this person. It becomes a negative loop that you get trapped in. It makes it so hard to move on past this person. But when you stop blaming yourself, it makes it easier to understand why they are the way they are, and it makes it easier to stop the rumination. Ultimately, it makes it easier to let go, emotionally detach, and heal. Then in the future, now use it as a lesson. You've recognized what those emotional distancing behaviors look like. You recognize what emotional unavailability looks like because you've experienced it. Now you know what these red flags are, and they are perfect opportunities to hold boundaries in the future if you ever encounter those kind of behaviors again. Boundaries being your limits of what you want, don't need, and really what you expect and don't expect. Those boundaries will protect you because when you recognize these unhealthy behaviors in the future, you're not personalizing them, and what you're doing is saying, oh, I recognize this doesn't work for me. And you're saving yourself the heartache of prolonging a relationship with a person who is not investing in you the way that you are in them. So spare yourself from anxious attachment. Spare yourself from going down that rabbit hole. Do not blame yourself for the avoidance behavior. The avoidance behavior, that's their responsibility, not yours.